It certainly was a bit of a turbulent offseason last year for the Miami Dolphins. You had the whole controversy around Stephen Ross and tampering involving Tom Brady and Sean Payton, which ultimately cost the Dolphins their first-round pick in the 2023 draft. You had the saga with firing Brian Flores and then him crying whatever the fuck he was crying and, making it about him and being a whiny bitch because he wasn't very good at his fucking job. You could disagree with me on that all you want, but when you think about some of the problems the NFL has in terms of diversity and the double standards in coaching that absolutely exist, Brian Flores is not, and I want you to repeat again, absolutely is not the guy that you want to be the face of that. Somebody like a Jim Caldwell, sure. Eric Bieniemy, absolutely. But you're talking about Brian Flores? No, dude, you had 3 years. You weren't very good. And the way you handled the quarterback position, mainly Tua Tagovailoa, was fucking dog shit. You should have been fired. And in fact, my big thing about the Miami Dolphins was that was Chris Grier's second head coaching hire that he had to end up firing. Why would you give him a third one? He should have been sent packing too, I felt. Well, maybe, thankfully for Dolphins fans, Stephen Ross didn't listen to me, but maybe long term you feel like he should have. But one thing you can certainly say about the Miami Dolphins and Chris Grier, the general manager's approach to this past offseason, was that they understood the game that they were in and that you had to do more to help Tua Tagovailoa. You had to put him in a better situation, which started with the head coach, reflecting in the hiring of Mike McDaniel away from Kyle Shanahan's staff with the San Francisco 49ers. So now you bring in somebody that really knows offensive football, somebody that's going to be a good mentor, somebody that's going to work well with Tua. That's piece number one. Then you say, you know what? We're not done getting this kid weapons to throw to. You drafted Jalen Waddle last year high. Great. Now you go make the big splashy trade to go bring in Tyreek Hill, and all of a sudden you're saying, holy crap, we got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. That's going to scare some teams because that is a hell of a lot of speed. Not just speed, but run after the catch ability. And when you talk about Tua, I know that the Tua bots on social media, you dare say anything bad or question anything about Tua, they'll rage, but they can fucking rage and cry into their own cups. The reality is that Tua is not an incredibly strong arm quarterback. Just because he can throw the ball 50 yards down the field does not mean he has a strong arm. A lot of average dudes in their 20s and 30s can throw the football 50 yards. That doesn't mean that they have a cannon for an arm. But what Tua can do is he can be relatively precise in where he hits guys, especially over the middle. And when you look at Hill and Waddle, there are two guys that can get you a lot of run after the catch, yards after the catch. That's a type of system that works very well for Tua. So it's well positioned. That's the type of system that Mike McDaniel brought in. So I really like the approach that the Miami Dolphins took here. And then looking to beef up that offensive line, which obviously this team the past couple of years had invested a lot of resources in terms of the draft, and that offensive line still sucked. They bring in guys like Connor Williams and Teron Armstead. Like, you're trying to make a concerted effort to say, if Tua doesn't get it done in 2022, it is solely on Tua because we've given him everything he should fucking need. And really, honestly, it was a yo-yo of a season for the Miami Dolphins. They started off 3-0, beating the Patriots, beating the Ravens, beating the Bills. Like, this was a team that was getting some attention early, right? This was a team that was hot early. This was a team that people were looking at and saying potentially Tua Tagovailoa might be an MVP candidate. And yes, that's true. They absolutely did. But then they lost their next 3. But then they came back and won their next 5. So you're sitting there all of a sudden, this is an 8-3 team. And you're saying, man, oh man, this team going 8-3, no wonder they fucking fired Brian Flores. Absolutely. But then they kind of hit the skids, obviously. They lost 5 games in a row. And even in Week 18, where they needed to win to make the playoffs, they beat the Jets, sure, but what was it, like an 11-6 game? It was in really ugly fashion to make the playoffs. And credit to them, because you didn't have Tua at that point, obviously, with the concussion concerns. They were a game opponent for the Bills in the wild card round, but still lost 34-31, and the season was over. So the season at one point in time, the Dolphins were looking great, but it really got overshadowed, honestly, with the saga surrounding Tua Tagovailoa and his concussions, begging questions about how the team and the team's doctors, the league, handled this situation. and what this might hold for him and his future and for the Miami Dolphins as well. There's no question, when you watch the Miami Dolphins with Tua at the helm, the offense was able to move the ball and score points. There's no question about that. Like, the numbers backed it up. You could watch the games and you could clearly see that. But it does beg a big question. Like, this guy had a couple of concussions. You know, how many concussions is this guy going to be able to take before you start to wonder whether or not he could ever play again? And can you really count on Tua Tagovailoa to actually stay healthy for an entire season? I think some Dolphins fans get so caught up in wanting to defend Tua and feeling like this us against the world mentality, whatever. But at some point in time, you have to be grown-ups and adults, and you have to ask the question of, if this guy cannot stay healthy when the number one most important ability for any starting quarterback in the NFL to have is availability, how much do you really want to continue to go down this path? How much do you want to follow this road? And how much would you want to potentially think about extending him for a long-term deal and tying yourself to Tua for the next 5 to 7 years? Those are not mean-spirited or tough, ridiculous questions asked. Those are tough questions and the absolute right fucking questions. Now, if you want to sit there and believe in Tua and believe that he'll be healthy, fine. But don't be so pissy about when others question the logic of that. As they should. As you should. I mean, because you got to wonder, right? And I'm trying to stay away from even the whole debate about what happened when Tua, played on Sunday and it looked like he had a concussion. Then he plays the Bengals game and he went like this and, back-to-back concussions in a week and then another concussion later. Like, I'm trying to avoid all of that for the time being and just stick to the reality of what we're talking about here is this is a guy that you absolutely should have some concerns about whether or not he could stay healthy for an entire season. And if he can't stay healthy for an entire season, do you have to sit there and consider at some point moving on from him long term? That said, I don't expect the Dolphins to be doing that because you can make a change. That doesn't mean that change is automatically for the better. They've kind of made their bed and now they have to lie in it and make the best out of it. They're more than $15 million over the salary cap at the time of recording this video. Certainly nowhere near a doomsday scenario, but it will somewhat restrict and limit what they could do in the offseason. They also don't have a first-round pick now because not only the tampering stuff, but they traded away the first-round pick that they had from the 49ers to the Denver Broncos in the Bradley Chubb deal. But it's not total desperation. They've got a second-round pick. They've got a couple of third-rounders. It just probably perhaps places a greater emphasis on getting those picks right because you need some guys that can contribute. You certainly need some guys on that defense. I know some Dolphins fans on Twitter pining for Bobby Wagner, and I can certainly understand wanting to bring him in. But again, how would you make that work in terms of the current structure of the team's salary cap position? I'm not saying it's impossible by any stretch of the imagination, but you look at the Dolphins heading into 2023, and you say, if Tua could stay healthy, this is a team that can win double-digit games, and they could be a bit scary. If you run into some similar situations where Tua can't stay healthy, you have to wonder if this thing's going to backslide in South Beach pretty quickly.